I've been struggling at late to try and kind of fully get my arms around this whole George Washington concept that I talk about, or this idea of when you're in a position where everything seems to indicate that you should do X, but you feel like you should do Y, right? So George Washington was president, 2 terms, everybody wanted him to stay. It wasn't just that he could have stayed and it wouldn't have been wrong. It was actually that people were telling him it's the right thing to do. Like you need to stay. But he saw beyond that, arguably, and said, no, I'm gonna, step down and let somebody else be president for the greater good, etc. And what I'm struggling with is I'm trying to understand what's at the core of that. Like what's at the core of when people can't do that? What's actually driving it? And I'm trying to think of it through the lens of like the math that we always talk about, right? I believe every action we take, every belief, every thought, everything that we form in our heads is based on some calculation. We run some cost benefit and we do the thing that seems to come out net positive. And what I'm struggling with is when I describe these quote unquote George Washington moments, I always say like the math seems so clear that it's X, but you should do Y. But that runs counter to what I also believe, which is there's a logic behind everything we do. And if you're sophisticated enough at the math, you'll see that the benefit actually comes from Y, right? So how do you reconcile that, right? Is the math actually saying X is right and you should just do Y anyway? Or is the math actually saying Y is right and you're not good enough at math to see that? And I was watching a Richard Feynman video recently that maybe helped me think of this in a framing that makes sense of it a bit more. He was talking about science, and he was talking about the nature of how we research things and investigate things and try and discover new things in science, and how to really unlock new discoveries and really make progress in science, the importance is there's a level of humility there, obviously, and this willingness to say, like, I understand this is how we see it now, and this is the framework or the construct of how we view, whatever it is. It could be physics, chemistry, whatever. This is what we know, and based on our current the current knowledge we have on this topic and everything we know about it and the mechanics of it and how the dynamics and how it plays out and the rules of it, if you will, it tells us this is how it works. But we know throughout history that we need to push beyond that, right? And that doesn't mean we're always going to be right. We'll probably be wrong a lot of the times, but to discover new things, to make breakthroughs, we need to recognize that, hey, these rules, this construct, this framework that feels so right to us and feels so true and objectively true, we have to understand that there's likely aspects of it that are wrong, or there's definitely aspects of it that are wrong. And when we make those breakthroughs, it's because of that. Because we can almost step outside the current framework and see there's actually a different framework. There's a different set of rules of dynamics that's at play here. And I think that applies to these George Washington moments too, because if you go back to the math analogy, it's almost as if typically we run the math, understanding math to work, right? And I'm using math figuratively, but we understand the math to work by certain rules. You look at all the inputs, and even if you do it in the most sophisticated way, it's not about your level of expertise with that math. It's about the constraints of that framework, the rules, the dynamics that you understand about how that math works. So no matter how sophisticated you are, you're going to think X is the right choice. I'm looking at everything, I'm breaking it down, I'm looking at the cost benefit, and it's net positive for X. It doesn't matter how much better I get at the math, it's always going to give me X. To get to Y, to see how Y is beneficial, you have to do the Feynman thing. You have to break through that and understand that there's a different framework. Maybe not completely different, but it's broader than this. There's differences, there's things we didn't recognize that make this function differently. It's not the same rules that we thought when I was running this math. So you almost have to learn a different type of math, or at least appreciate that there might be different rules or dynamics at play. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the key piece of this here, is to come to that realization. And you could think about it in kind of philosophical terms, maybe, right? I need to think about this more, that it starts to speak to when you run that cost benefit, in many ways you're looking at it just through your own lens, in a very short-sighted, hey, what's the cost benefit for me? Because at the end of the day, I do believe that our base value drivers are that we want to survive and we want to procreate and we want to do kind of these base things. And that at the end of at the core of it, at the root of it, that's what drives our calculation. Maybe there needs to be some recognition that no, that's taken us this far, right? And that's all true, but there's more beyond that. We need to break through that and understand that you have to look at that calculation broader than just those base value drivers. which begs the question of why, right? Why do you want to go beyond those base value drivers? And I think that's where a lot of people get to spiritual and religious views of, well, because there's a greater good here, or there's something beyond us that we're working towards. Maybe, right? That might be the case. I tend to think in more mathematical, kind of big logical terms, in that maybe it's just that benefit still does reflect on you, but there's more benefit for you to be had if there's benefit all around, right? That's a topic for another day. But I think the key point is just possibly understanding that parallel, that everything that's pointing you towards X, it's not that your math is wrong. It's that you don't understand all of the dynamics at play here of what the math actually should be. And that's what you have to get to.